I made a game in about a week using the Rust programming language. Rust has a relatively slim game development ecosystem compared to the C++ Highlord, but it's a neat language, and this game is really just an educational project. However, while learning, yes, the language, not the game, I decided to try my first devlog. Cargo is a dream, I just want to say that, because adding dependencies in C++ can be quite frustrating. Error handling, memory safety, yada yada yada. Well, I think I've already done enough boilerplate, and I'm going to skip past basic mechanics to talk about the level editor I created for this game, because I just love it, because it was so frustrating to make. I could have used existing ones like tiled or LDTK, but since this is an educational project, I figured I should try my hand at it. How it works is, it displays the sprite atlas I'm using, courtesy of Kenny Assets. Then I can define how many individual sprites extend both horizontally and vertically. The information is stored in an internal grid, so the coordinate 0, 0 would be the first sprite. Since every tile is the same size, I can just offset it by some factor to get the next tiles. Since I have the coordinate positions of every tile stored in a grid, I can use those values to sample a sprite from the entire texture atlas. It's simple, and I really only have to load textures for every level once in the entire game because I just take individual slices from the mother texture, which happens to be inexpensive. Now, I can get tile information, but what about drawing the world? Well, it's quite simple really. Clicking on a box will set the texture to the selected tile. You can right click to erase it, although this gets more complicated as I decided to paint collisions too, using some not very ergonomic keybinds. F1, F2, F3, Control O, Control P, Control U, Control E. God, I honestly just hard-coded random input keys in order to control the editor. In any case, switching to collision mode using a keybind, you can click on an already placed tile and mark it as a wall. The difference between normal tiles and wall tiles gets important later on. Assuming you're still in collision mode, you can right click to erase collision tiles, but preserving the texture. I also use keybinds to set player and enemy spawn locations. Originally, enemies would be randomly spawned, but it really didn't look that well. The last feature of my level editor is saving and loading, the intricacies to which I will explain soon. And on a final note, there is no Control-Z undo in my level editor. Yes, I am a madman. Anyways, I store level data in JSON files because it's fairly easy to read and set up as opposed to XML. It took quite a lot of reading documentation to figure out how to serialize data, but it's surprisingly effortless in the grand scheme of things. Basic data types were automatic, and more complicated structures and enumerations were not too hard to set up. Let's talk about actual gameplay. So, I can now create levels and play the actual game in the same app. Yes, benefits of making your own level editor. When you have your entire world stored in a collection, things become very easy. For example, collision detection. As the player moves, we can convert this world position to grid position, which tells us which tile the player is on. We can check neighbor tiles by applying the offset I talked about earlier, and if any of them are wall tiles, then we stop the player's velocity. We store the player's old position and new position in different variables. Any collision sets his new position to his old position. Seeing the future through code is a very wonderful thing, really. The enemy moves towards the player using breadth first search. It's a really simple pathfinding algorithm, well, according to everyone else, because implementing it for the first time, it was not very fun. The enemies only resort to pathfinding when they are far away from the player and need to navigate walls lest they infinitely bang their heads against one. Otherwise, they can move directly towards the player, which feels more natural and is less computationally expensive since it's just simple vector subtraction. After collision and pathfinding, the last thing I wanted to do is combat before focusing on levels. As a side note, it turns out that coding all of this was lessening my motivation to keep adding game features like more enemies or more weapon types. I love the code-first approach to video games instead of having gaming engines to do most of the heavy lifting with their handy editors. But for a serious project, I am considering saving myself a lot of time to focus more on the game by using an engine. Unfortunately, I can't really find a notable mature engine that uses Rust well, which is a language I really like. Foreshadowing? Anyways, the enemy has a sword that points in the direction of the player. When they get in a certain range, the sword moves towards the player's direction quickly before going back to the enemy. Simple animation, ugly in code. I decided to tint the sword's color to red in order to display an idle time. Yeah, I think as a programmer, I've improved immensely by not using a game engine, but I've definitely waned as a designer. For the most part, the player is the same, however it points in the direction of the mouse cursor. The enemy and player both turn red when they are hit, signifying a period where they are invulnerable to any damage. The player can also use a quote-unquote shield, which is really just a lazy circle surrounding the player sprite, lasting for a brief duration, making you invulnerable to attacks. I suppose, in another stroke of wit, I made it so that you can either block or attack, but you can't do both at the same time. That way you can't pop a shield while also attacking, or attack and then shield at the same time. I decided that was all I wanted to add, because I really wanted to do some experimentation with another idea I had. Possible video on that. But I meticulously designed 5 levels. Loading and restarting levels after death was not too difficult, since I was already using the same functions from my editor. There is no main menu. I hate the UI system for MacroQuad, which is the library I was using to develop this game. However, it's really a great library in any case, reminding me of my favorite C++ library. No, probably my favorite library of all time, Raylib, which I could have used for this project. But anyways, when you beat the game, there is no end screen. The application simply quits. I love it. Anyways, here's some gameplay. It's a private project on itch that I'm kinda too lazy to make public, and that I'm probably never gonna work on again, but hey, it's a learning experience. As is this devlog, which for most of the audio I've recorded in one take, which is kind of crazy, and I really don't know how to record these types of videos, so if you have any feedback, please add a comment. I'd really appreciate that. Anyways, enjoy. See you the next time.